opening statement he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. I applaud the work that you're doing for our country. And let me say, my recent visit to the State Department, I found that the morale is very good. Over the last 2 years, the administration has embarked on a forward-leaning agenda, which is putting America back where it needs to be. And I want to thank you for ending the era of leading from behind and strategic patience. The importance of our diplomatic mission cannot be overstated. With the growing crisis in Venezuela, an unpredictable North Korea, China and Russia creating mischief around the globe, terrorism on the rise in Africa, and Iran threatening Israel, we must show our strength through hands of diplomacy. The President's budget request identifies our most challenging threats. For example, it includes $662 million to counter Russia's malign influence in Europe and Eurasia. This vital assistance will support our allies like Ukraine to help enhance their cybersecurity infrastructure to counter Russian attacks and their propaganda and disinformation campaigns. In regards to Ukraine's upcoming elections, I will closely watch, and I know you will as well, how the Russians interfere. It may be a precursor to what we will see here in 2020. The President's budget proposal also contains some much-needed reforms. However, I do agree with the Chairman. I believe that certain cuts have unintended consequences that cost us more in the long term. This is especially true of cuts to critical humanitarian and developmental assistance programs that promote democracy, support economic growth, and provide life-saving resources to bolster stability in areas at risk of terrorism and extremist ideologies. As the former Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis once said, if you don't fund the State Department fully, then I need to buy more ammunition. On terrorism, a few years ago, you and I had the opportunity to travel to Northern Africa and the Middle East, and I remember watching the F-18s taking off in the Persian Gulf from the deck of the Harry Truman to hit ISIS targets in Syria. Today, it almost feels a little surreal to be able to finally say that their so-called caliphate is gone. And I applaud your efforts in that mission. But we also still note the threat from ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and others still remains. On fragile states, a key lesson from violent conflicts in fragile states is that they provide fertile recruiting ground for terrorist and transnational criminal organizations. This broken model can be fixed, and we need to do more in terms of prevention. That is why Chairman Engel and I reintroduced our Fragile States Bill this Congress. It will require that the administration launch a new initiative to counter our assistance to these broken states. On the Middle East, any strategy there must always include strengthening our ties with Israel. And for starters, I was very proud of your efforts and the President's to see our embassy move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Mr. Secretary, I want to applaud your efforts also in countering Iran. Some don't see their true menace. They are still the #1 state sponsor of terror. They support Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, hold Americans hostage. They have an assassination campaign in Europe, a reckless missile program, suppress their people's freedom, and let's not forget, want to wipe out Israel and chant death to America. I applaud last week's sanctions that target Iranian weapons of mass destruction proliferators. We cannot let Iran get nuclear weapons ever. On China, their government aggressively steals our intellectual property, threatens Taiwan, partakes in growing military adventurism, and targets both developed and underdeveloped nations through their One Belt, One Road initiative. I am very supportive of the action items laid out in your Indo-Pacific speech last year. As you know, many countries tell us America is just not there the way the Chinese and other countries are. And that is why I introduced the Championing American Business Through Diplomacy Act with Chairman Engel. In sum, it bolsters U.S. economic and commercial diplomacy by mandating that our diplomats have better training and do more to ensure countries do business with American companies rather than with the Chinese. On Venezuela, we can all agree that the socialist policies of Nicolas Maduro have turned the once rich country into a failed mafia state. With little food and medicine, millions of people are suffering more every day and forced to flee to other countries in the region. Maduro's armed thugs are blocking the delivery of humanitarian aid. They've shot innocent civilians, kidnapped the chief of staff of interim President Guaido, and just yesterday attacked Guaido's motorcade. I would also like to note that Maduro has taken 4 Texans who worked for Citgo and put them in a Venezuelan prison. I commend the president for supporting the people of Venezuela in their quest to take back their country through free and fair elections, and applaud neighbors like Colombia, Brazil, and the Lima Group for their effort. Secretary Pompeo, it's a great honor to welcome you today as a secretary, as a former colleague, and a friend. And I've always said that partisanship, as the chairman says, must end at the water's edge. This hearing gives us a chance to put partisan politics aside and offer solutions to complex issues. I look forward to your testimony